Good morning and welcome to another edition of the NGG Australia-India Conversations. We're delighted to welcome back Ambassador Anil Wadhwa for a chat with us, particularly since he has just completed the Australia Economic Strategy, which is a reciprocal report by the Indian government to the India Economic Strategy to 2035, commissioned by the Australian government. Welcome, Ambassador Wadhwa, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You've had an incredible journey over the last, 12 months, where you've visited Australia on a number of occasions, and you've also met a number of companies that are interested in looking at India as a possible opportunity. Plus, I know that you've actually travelled India extensively to meet Australian companies that are already present in India. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey over the last 12 months and how you came to, almost finalizing the Australia Economic Strategy.
So it's been many months of hard work because it means sometimes follow-up as well, and all told me and the KPMG and CIA team have met about 300 people. Wow. And institutions, governments, government organizations, media, think tanks, because we wanted to take a holistic view of a particular subject and how we could further this cooperation between India and Australia. I think it was important to have conversations both on the Indian and the Australian side so that you have a complementary view of a subject, and also to know whether that proposal that you're going to make is going to succeed both ways. If there was a suggestion made and if it was not endorsed by the other side, we've not taken that into account. Sure. So I think the report will offer something which is already tested out on both sides, and there is a desire to move forward there. We've also suggested some case studies, and we've also suggested how to go about getting into a particular sector, especially in terms of investments which India would need to make here in Australia, for example, in the critical minerals area, right, because of the e-mobility program, and also Australian investments in food technology, medtech, also in terms of investments in education-related institutions, coding, etc. Right. So there are water technologies. It's a whole host of opportunities, and if we take a comprehensive view of this report plus the Australia-India strategy, then companies will have a good roadmap for the future.
Absolutely. What were some of the standout points for you in the last 12 months? I think you've come to Australia 4 or 5 times.
Yes.
And you've actually travelled more of Australia than I have in that time. And I've been living here for 31 years. So you've really, covered all corners of Australia, and you've met a number of Indian businesses and Australian businesses, as well as India. What were some of the highlights outside of the industry sectors? What were some of the people and the companies that you met that really made you feel that this is actually really good? There is some substance here that we can actually add value to and accelerate that and increase that.
You see, it's like this. There is a lot of opportunity in India today because it's a need of the society. So we have a lot of research and innovation happening in Australia. It's a service-driven industry now, service-driven society now, and because of that there are some niche areas which have been developing very well, and Australia also requires these be scaled up given the fact that there's a smaller population here, but the technology is of high quality, well tested and well branded. So Australian companies need partners. Yes. India offers that opportunity to scale up their product and also to have a market which will be very beneficial for companies, especially in the technology side. and plus we have a lot of complementarities as far as financial technology is concerned, cyber security is concerned, and there we are working on hydrogen research, hydrogen fuel research. Then we are working on alternate technologies to other kinds of fuel, biofuels for instance. So if we join hands and increase this cooperation, I think both India and Australia will benefit in future.
Fantastic. The India Economic Strategy, which was launched last year by the Australian government, focuses on 10 major sectors that are opportunity sectors for Australian businesses and 10 states within India. Would you mind expanding a little bit on the Australia Economic Strategy, and which are the main priority sectors and which are some of the other sectors that are emerging sectors that the Indian businesses and the Indian government would like to see as far as their relationship with Australia?
So I think top of the list in the Australian India strategy was education. And when we're talking to the universities and students in India, they had their own perspective on how this engagement should take place. There are two major factors as far as they are concerned. One is that there should be collaborations in the higher education side on a much larger scale. So that includes PhDs and research. They also feel that there should be more dual degrees, and therefore we recommended there should be more arrangements entered into by Australian universities. There is need for specialized vocational training which has the certification of an Australian institution, because it leads to employability for the people who go through that course. Also it makes it more affordable if it's done in India. There's need for scalability, so there's the Training the Trainers program, which is very important in that context, and specialized services which are needed in Australia. People can be trained in those as well, so that they can actually fill the need in the Australian market at some point in time. In all this, I think the Australian universities felt that it was more important to go in for larger number of recruits or recruitment. So these desires of the Indian side were sort of set aside in the past. Yes. I noticed over the last 2 years or so that they've come to realize that if quality education has to be given, and if there has to be a scaling up of the Indian students coming to Australia, then these aspects have to be incorporated into the strategy. And more universities are now adapting that. We've also said that in our report that there should be more emphasis on innovation, and so far the universities were funding and driving innovation, but in India, until the new education policy comes into force and education is made, research is made part of the education process in universities, till then of course the governmental intervention is important. So we proposed an innovation fund in addition to the scientific research fund which already exists. So that's called the Strategic Research Fund, by the way. And we also propose another fund for the humanities side, because there is a demand for things like museology, art and music, which India does not have enough courses for. Sure. And there is a need to fill those gaps. So only if we have the governments driving it in the beginning at least, we will have a movement towards that. Absolutely. So that will also lead to more student exchanges. I'm sure there will be more students from India coming into Australia at a later age.
Yes, yeah. So I totally understand that, to marry up Australia's 10 industry sectors and to find pathways to collaborate there is great. Within your report, have you identified any priority sectors just for Indian businesses and the opportunities outside of just marrying up the education?
Yes, so we have about 11 or 12 priority sectors. We also have 10 emerging sectors. Right. where we have identified opportunity which is being utilized on a smaller scale now, but it will become very big in the future.
Right.
Now, these are technologies for the future, or areas which will become big in collaboration between India and Australia in future date. So we flag them now because it's important that people pay attention there.
Sure.
And things like medical technology and education technology, water resources technology, resource technology,
Right.
METS, everything has been identified
Right.
there. And if the industry focuses on these, I'm sure they will get very good results in the future.
Right. Moving forward, we now have both countries, both governments releasing reports identifying sectors, identifying opportunities, etc., etc. The next stage is education of Indian businesses on the opportunities in Australia and vice versa, and then the implementation. Where do you see that, and how do you see that evolving?
It's very important that we have an implementation process which takes place at least over the next 2 years. The reason is that the industry on both sides needs to take interest in each other. And for that to happen, they must have an awareness about what the reports contain. If the governments have to drive this, then they have to meet together. We propose they meet every 6 months and take into account industries which are affected, any issues which come up with regard to banking issues, double taxation, lending, investment issues, approvals, phytosanitary measures, which we've identified as stumbling blocks in this process. They should all be taken up in this review mechanism at the governmental level. Even visas, for instance, sometimes it can become an issue. So we need to review these constantly and also see how the reports are being utilized and what can be done on both sides to utilize these reports.
I really wanted to congratulate you because I found out recently that this report that has been commissioned by the Indian government, which you chair, was the first of its kind for any country in the world by India. And that to me says that, you know, there's a lot of scope, and the Indian government is now taking notice of Australia. In the past, we've been through a roller coaster ride within the trade and investment space, particularly between India and Australia. Today, Australia released a report last year. The Indian government is reciprocating. So they're showing each other mutual respect and mutual understanding. I believe this is important because there are many different factors that are forging together to allow this to happen, to make this happen. It wasn't just Australia and India coming together. There's a lot of things that are happening globally, particularly in the geopolitics, that are allowing this to happen in a more professional way. What are your thoughts on what's happening globally, particularly geopolitically, the advent of the Quad, that is allowing this to happen, and how far do you think it will go in the future between Australia and India?
Well, I think geopolitically Australia and India have come closer together, there's no doubt about it. And today we're talking about extensive cooperation in various fields. That includes security, we are actually talking about an interoperability agreement in the defense side, which could not be thought of a few years ago. We're doing exercises together. We are cooperating on the environmental side in terms of energy security, in terms of multilateral institutions. Quad is one example where we come together, but we cooperate a lot in East Asia Summit, for instance.
Right.
And the whole gamut of issues in the Indo-Pacific region. So whether it's IORA or information centers which have been set up under part of the Indo-Pacific, and any other initiative that you talk about, India and Australia are always there on the same side. So it's a coming together of two like-minded democracies, I would say. It's always been there, but we never had cooperation which is as close as it is today. So that gives you a good platform or a background to further trade and investment, because trade and investment is the driver of a long-term relationship. And we just got to make efforts to increase this as much as we can. Yes. So I believe that the two reports that we will have will be a roadmap, like you said. Now it's up to the governments to encourage industry to take this forward, because they are the ones who can drive it.
Agree. You have been an ambassador and part of the Indian Foreign Services for 37 odd years, long time. And you've seen many iterations of the Indian Foreign Services. You've been an ambassador to many different countries, and you've been secretary for East, which you looked after Russia, East Europe, Australia, New Zealand, etc. When you look at that and the experiences and the knowledge you have of that, and then you relate that back to today with where India is, the energy that is behind India today, and the number of countries that are very, very, pro doing business with India, the advent of the ease of doing business in India, making it easier for foreign investors to come in. India is very welcoming. The doors are now opened, well and truly. A little bit more work to do in the economic space, but what do you see? What do you see in regards to the Indian government's acceptance or welcoming of Australia?
I think there was no reluctance in the past also, but probably both sides did not seize their opportunities in time. So we sort of looking past each other. Yes. It was a comfortable relationship, but nothing beyond that. But now that we focused on the Indo-Pacific and the issues which have arisen around the world, yes, that's what made this focus come back. And the result is that these, also the fact that Australia came up with the India economic strategy first, drew attention of the Indian leadership to Australia, and they decided that they had to reciprocate. Yes. Because that focus of Australia was important, and India has therefore come up with this report now. They would be looking forward to strengthening this relationship in every field which is possible. Right. And of course, if there is more attention paid by Australia to India in the economic sector, then this relationship can really have a very firm footing.
I agree. And finally, in the next 6 months, 24 months, 5 years, where do you see this relationship? You've seen it from both sides. You've spoken to both governments, and you've travelled extensively and spoken to business, the community in both countries. Where do you see the Australia-India relationship?
I think it's going to go much, much further up. And it's also because of the fact that we often ignore the fact that we have now a growing Indian diaspora in Australia, which is a very big bond. It's a base for a number of other activities. Education ties are booming, tourism is booming, and more people are paying attention to Australia. Yeah. So if Australians go to India in larger numbers, of course we need much more connectivity, which I always keep saying, then it helps trade and tourism and people-to-people contacts. So we've got to pay attention to this aspect first and foremost, and make sure that the ideas between people, there's a free flow of ideas, and there's more interaction at the people-to-people level, not just universities, but in also areas where it concerns both of us, like the environment, for instance. Of course. Yes. And this debate is on in both countries, of course. India had faced tremendous amount of problems on issues of pollution, and therefore joining the International Solar Alliance and deciding that there should be a greater mix of non-fossil fuels into the economy is an excellent decision by India, which is carrying forward with full concentration. And in that process, if we have Australian companies who can help, they will be much more involved in this process.
Yeah, I agree. Ambassador Wadhwa, any final messages to the audience from yourself?
I just feel that there should be more attention paid by both sides to each other. There should be more, innovative solutions which should be thought of making sure that the economies of the two countries prosper, and how we can benefit from each other's rich heritage and resources and talent pool that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate that, and congratulations on your report again. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.